The night air over Narragansett Bay carried salt and money in equal measure, and Serena Marsh had learned, through 20 years of careful social architecture, how to make both work for her. She stood at the iron railing of the Meridian Yacht Club's main balcony, a glass of Bilcart salmon in her right hand, her white linen dress catching the last traces of the July light as the sun finished its arc over the water. The harbor below was turning from silver to pewter, and the dock lights were coming on one by one, their reflections breaking apart on the gentle black chop. Behind her, 80 guests filled the terrace with the specific low hum of a crowd that has been carefully assembled and knows it, Newport's most polished and most credentialed, people who had learned to treat cocktail hour as an audition. The string quartet finished a passage of Debussy and moved without pause into something Vivaldi adjacent, and the sound carried easily in the warm air. Elliot Marsh, 46 years old, stood slightly apart from the group near the French doors. He held a glass of sparkling water in one hand. He had a quiet expression on his face that people who did not know him well often mistook for contentment, and people who knew him even less well mistook for vacancy. He was not a tall man, not a showy man, not the kind of man who announced himself when he walked into a room. He wore a navy blazer that fit him cleanly, dark trousers and a pale blue shirt with no tie, and he had the specific kind of calm that certain people spend entire decades trying to manufacture without ever quite arriving at it. He was watching the harbor. He had been watching it since they arrived. Serena turned from the railing. She raised her champagne glass and smiled the smile she had been performing at events like this since she was 19 years old. Full, practiced, warm, in the way that a fireplace in a hotel lobby is warm, producing the sensation of heat without actually reaching anyone. She had a gift for the appropriate gesture. She had cultivated it with discipline and attention and a genuine pride in the result. "I want to make sure everyone has had a chance to meet my husband," she said, and the way she said the word husband contained a particular quality of theatrical affection that people in the crowd recognized as performance but chose to accept as sincerity, because that is what you do at events like this. "Elliot is wonderful with things around the house. He fixes things. He is extraordinarily good at it. We are very lucky to have him." The laughter was polite and immediate. It was exactly the kind of laughter that 80 assembled guests produce when they understand they are supposed to produce it, and the evening is going well. 80 champagne glasses tilted, 80 people smiling. Across the terrace, Warren Calloway, 67 years old, raised his own glass. He was a broad, silver-haired man who had built a real estate consortium out of a suite of offices in downtown Boston over 4 decades, and who wore his success the way certain men wear a very good blazer, visibly at all times in a way designed to ensure no one in the room missed it. He had held a gold membership at the Meridian Yacht Club for 28 years, and he spoke of the club with a particular proprietary warmth, the warmth of a man who has confused long familiarity with ownership. "To the people who hold things up," Warren said, raising his glass toward Elliot, "quietly, invisibly. The caretakers." He smiled at Elliot with the specific warmth of a man who has decided 17 years into an association that he has correctly assessed another person and filed them accurately. He let the word caretakers sit in the air for a moment, and then he drank. Gloria Calloway, 64 years old, stood beside her husband in a navy shift dress, pearl earrings nearly identical to her daughter's. A champagne glass held with the practiced ease of a woman who had attended events like this 4 or 5 times a year for 30 years. She echoed the phrase with a small, satisfied nod. "The caretakers," she said softly, turning the word over as if it were a compliment, which he believed it was, and then she turned back to the woman she had been speaking with. Preston Hale, 42 years old, stood at the rail on the far side of the terrace in a linen jacket the color of sea glass. He was the kind of handsome that photographs well, square jaw, silver temples, the expression of a man who has been told his whole life that he is the most interesting person in most rooms. He held his champagne glass without drinking it. He watched Elliot for a moment with the flat, comfortable attention of a man who has already decided how a particular story ends and is simply waiting, without much investment, for the final scenes to play out. Marcus Trent, 49 years old, head of security for the Meridian Yacht Club, stood at the outer edge of the terrace in a dark blazer. He had a glass of water in his hand that no one had offered him. He had been standing in roughly the same position for 40 minutes, listening with the quality of attention that comes from years of professional practice, the kind of listening that is also categorizing and filing at the same time. The encrypted recording device in his interior breast pocket had been running since before the first guests arrived. Reginald Wyatt, 71 years old, stood near the center of the terrace and placed his champagne glass slowly and deliberately on the tray of a passing waiter. He was a man who had belonged to the Meridian Yacht Club since 1987, 37 years of dinners and regattas and summer galas, a man who had known Thomas Marsh personally and who had watched this club change in ways Thomas would have recognized and ways Thomas would not. He looked across the terrace at Elliot Marsh, who was standing near the French doors, watching the harbor. He looked at Warren Calloway, who was accepting congratulations from 3 people simultaneously. His expression did not change. After a moment, he turned and went inside without finishing his champagne. But what Serena Marsh did not know, standing at the iron railing with 80 guests laughing at her husband behind her, was that the 94% beneficial ownership of every dock, every dining room, every chandelier, every serving tray, every square foot of polished hardwood floor, and every gold membership list she was standing on, was held in a sealed trust registered with the Delaware Court of Chancery under the name Crestwater Holdings, LLC. And the beneficial owner of 94% of Crestwater Holdings, LLC, was Elliot Thomas Marsh, not on paper, not nominally, beneficially, legally, completely. Every chair Serena sat in at this club, every waiter she had waved away across 16 years of membership dinners, every gold membership card her father had brandished in Newport social circles for 28 years. Every inch of the iron railing she was resting her champagne glass on at this precise moment. His, all of it, every single bit. 6 weeks later, an attorney she had never seen before walked to a podium in that same dining room and read 3 sentences into a microphone. By the time he finished the 3rd sentence, Warren Calloway's gold membership card had been collected from his table by a staff member who did not look up when she took it, did not offer an apology, and did not pause on her way back across the room. Some men do not rise to defend themselves. They simply let the tide come in. Stay with this story until the very end, because before it closes, a gold membership will be revoked. A 28-year legacy built on someone else's name will collapse under the weight of forged paperwork and a signed application that told 6 lies in 2 sentences, and a man that every person on that terrace had dismissed as invisible will walk out of his own club as the only person left standing. Subscribe and drop the word anchor in the comments if you believe that a quiet man's patience should never be mistaken for weakness, because this is a story about patience and what it eventually carries to the shore. Now let us go back to where this really began. On a Tuesday morning in late May, 11 weeks before the annual summer gala, Elliot Marsh sat at the oak desk in his home office on the 3rd floor of their Providence house and resolved a structural inspection crisis at the Meridian Yacht Club in 37 minutes without leaving his chair. The crisis had been flagged at 6:14 in the morning by the club's facilities supervisor, David Ortega, who had been with the club for 14 years and understood that certain things needed to reach Elliot directly, regardless of the hour. The issue was a cracked load-bearing beam in the eastern dockhouse, the older of the 2 dock structures, the one that dated to the original construction in 1971. The beam had been flagged in the previous year's inspection report as requiring monitoring. The new crack indicated that monitoring was no longer the appropriate response. Elliot handled it by encrypted message. He sent 4 messages in 23 minutes and made 2 brief follow-up calls. He contacted a licensed marine structural engineer whose number was in his direct files, a Newport contractor named Sullivan who had worked with the Meridian's infrastructure for 11 years and knew the eastern dockhouse the way a surgeon knows a particular patient's anatomy. He contacted the club's insurance carrier to confirm that emergency structural repairs of this category were covered without a waiting period under the current policy, which they were. He contacted the Newport City Building Inspector's office to arrange an emergency site walkthrough by noon. By 6:51 in the morning, the engineer was en route, the insurance carrier had issued written confirmation, and the building inspector's office had confirmed the noon appointment. The eastern dockhouse would be closed to members for 11 days during the repair. Members would be told it was a routine maintenance closure. That was accurate as far as it went. By 7 o'clock, the club's chief financial officer had sent Elliot the weekly financial summary. She addressed him in writing, as she always did, as the principal. Because the trust documents that governed Crestwater Holdings LLC used that term, and she was the kind of woman who read trust documents with great care and followed them with precision. Her name was Diane Forsyth. She was 55 years old and had spent 23 years before this role managing trust properties and fiduciary portfolios, developing over those years a comprehensive filing system, an excellent memory for numbers that should not match, and a quiet, specific impatience for people who imagined that complicated arrangements would manage themselves if you simply did not look at them too carefully. Diane had flagged 2 items in the weekly summary. The first was a routine renewal for the club's dockage liability policy, requiring the principal's written authorization. The second was a note that the annual internal audit of the discretionary fund had returned a small but statistically irregular discrepancy across 6 years of transaction records, and that she had asked the trust's outside accounting firm to take a closer look. 3 other members of the club's senior staff had sent Elliot morning reports before 8 o'clock. The executive chef confirmed that the gala menu was finalized: 6 courses, a wine pairing by the sommelier, a late evening dessert service on the terrace. The events director reported that 81 guests had confirmed attendance, the highest figure in 4 years. The director of membership had flagged 2 pending applications that required the trust's standard background review before approval. Elliot responded to each report within 5 minutes. He asked 2 clarifying questions, one about the fish sourcing for the gala menu's 3rd course, and one about the timeline for the membership reviews. He approved both membership applications after reading the background summaries. At 8:47, Serena opened the office door. She was in her robe, holding a coffee mug, and she looked at his desk the way she always looked at his desk, briefly, without curiosity, with the mild and habitual lack of interest of a person who has long since decided that the details of what someone does are less important than the general category they have been placed in. "Plumbing issue at the old Whitmore property," Elliot said. He did not look up. Serena said. She poured herself a second cup of coffee from the carafe on the credenza. She went back upstairs. She did not ask anything further. She had not asked anything further about his morning work in more years than he could now clearly count. Elliot watched the door close. He turned back to his screens. He opened the discretionary fund reconciliation that Diane had attached to her summary and read it carefully, following the transaction log chronologically. The numbers were not large. Individually, nothing stood out on its own. But when you read them in sequence, the pattern was clear enough that you did not need to be a forensic accountant to see it. You only needed to know, as Elliot did, who was signing the requests and what the fund's authorization chain looked like. He closed the document and sat for a moment with his coffee, which had gone cold. By then, Diane Forsyth had already flagged the access log anomaly. Elliot Marsh had met Serena Calloway at a charity dinner in Boston in the spring of 1998. He was 28 years old. Serena was 20, a sophomore at Providence College, seated across the table from him in a yellow dress at a children's hospital fundraiser. She talked about the hospital's pediatric oncology ward with a genuine and specific knowledge that surprised him. She had spent 2 summers volunteering there, reading to children during treatment, and she spoke about it with the careful discretion of someone who had actually been present. He had asked for her number on a cocktail napkin, which was a ridiculous thing to do, and she had laughed at him genuinely and written it down anyway. They dated for 14 months. He proposed to Serena on the pier behind the Meridian on a Sunday in late October. The club closed for the season, the harbor dark and cold below the dock lights. He had his grandmother's ring in his coat pocket, a round diamond in a platinum setting, simple and old-fashioned, and exactly right. She said yes before he finished asking. Warren Calloway had made his position on the engagement clear before the dinner that formalized it. He was in the kitchen of the Newport summer house when Elliot arrived with Serena, and he continued to address Gloria rather than Elliot even after Elliot entered. He fixes things, Warren said in the tone of a man asking Gloria to confirm something he had understood correctly. Serena, you are a Calloway. Marry someone who owns things, not someone who maintains them. Serena kissed her father's cheek and told him that Elliot was wonderful. At the time, she believed it. Warren came to the wedding. He gave a toast at the reception that was congratulatory and condescending in proportions that shifted depending on where in the room you were standing, and he never, in 16 years of holidays and dinners and summer gatherings, asked Elliot a single question about his professional life that was not engineered to confirm the original verdict. This was a man who maintained things, and maintaining things was a lesser category, and the distinction mattered, and Warren would not let anyone forget it. Thomas Marsh had built the Meridian Yacht Club from a single dock and a converted boathouse on the Newport waterfront in the spring of 1971. He was 31 years old. He had spent 7 years working as a marine contractor along the New England coast, saving money with the kind of discipline that does not appear to be discipline at all because it is simply who the person is. He purchased the waterfront lot in 1969, spent 2 years permitting and planning, built the first dock himself with 2 helpers over a spring and summer. The Meridian opened in July of 1971 with 12 charter members and a dining room that seated 30. By the time Elliot was 12 years old, the Meridian had 4 dock structures, a full dining room with a wine cellar Thomas had curated personally, a private bar, a library room filled with maritime charts and navigation texts, and 47 members who had in common only that Thomas Marsh had personally vouched for each of them. He did not accept members based on their social connections or financial profile. He accepted them based on his assessment of their character, a process that had produced over 20 years a membership body of unusual quality and loyalty. Thomas was not a man who talked about money, he talked about quality. About the difference between a structure built to be sold and a structure built to stand 50 years in salt air and tidal stress and nor'easters. He talked to Elliot like an adult from the time Elliot was 8 years old, about real things without condescension. In the summer of 1984, when Elliot was 12, Thomas woke him before sunrise on a Tuesday morning in July and took him down to the end of the original pier. They sat on the pilings, father and son, and watched the light come through the fog in increments, the harbor invisible below them but audible, the water moving against the dock supports. They sat for a long time without speaking, which was something Thomas did. He was comfortable with silence, and he had given this to his son, along with everything else. "Still waters carry the deepest currents, son," Thomas said finally. "Never let the foolish mistake your calm for emptiness." Elliot was 12. He thought he understood. He would spend the next 34 years learning what the words actually contained. Thomas Marsh died 17 years ago on a Wednesday in the first week of November, at the age of 62, of a cardiac event that arrived without warning. He had been at the club that morning, inspecting the winter dock preparations, eating lunch at the dining room bar. He went home at 3 in the afternoon and died at home at 5:45. The people who loved him said it was impossible because he had seemed too solid, too much a part of the fixed landscape to leave it without ceremony. He had left the Meridian Yacht Club and Crestwater Holdings, LLC, to his son in a trust instrument his Boston maritime attorney had drafted and sealed the previous year. The trust named Elliot as 94% beneficial owner. The remaining 6% was held in a charitable remainder trust funding 3 maritime scholarship programs at Rhode Island institutions. The trust was filed with the Delaware Court of Chancery the day after the funeral. A certified letter arrived at Elliot's Providence address 3 weeks later. He sat with it in his kitchen for a long time before he called the attorney. He did not tell Serena that week. He was grieving in the specific way of a person who has lost someone they were not done knowing. He did not tell her in the weeks that followed because the right moment did not come, and then he did not tell her because something shifted, slowly, and then less slowly, in the way he read his wife's face when she talked about certain things. And he began to understand that the question of the right moment was less important than the question of the right person. What Serena never thought to ask, in 16 years of marriage to a man who spent his Tuesday mornings resolving structural inspections before 8 o'clock, was how the Meridian Yacht Club had remained solvent and thriving through 3 separate economic recessions. She had attended its galas and its dinners and had benefited from its amenities, and had accepted her family's gold membership as a given feature of Newport summers the way she accepted the weather or the tides. She had never asked who paid the staff, or negotiated the dock leases, or managed the trust distribution decisions, or signed off on the insurance renewals. She had simply assumed that these things happened, as most good things happen in the background of a certain kind of life, without requiring attention from the people who enjoy them. She was about to be educated on this point. The discovery of what Warren Calloway had been doing with the club's discretionary fund, and what Preston Hale had been doing in the club's private conference suite, and what Warren had told the International Yacht Association about his role in the club's history, did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. There was no intercepted letter, no tearful confession, no confrontation in a hallway. There was a financial audit, and then a records review, and then a registry search, and between the 3 of them they produced a picture so clear and so complete that the only remaining question was what to do about it. The first piece was the money. Over a period of 6 years, $180,000 in undisclosed membership concessions had been extracted from the Meridian Yacht Club's discretionary fund under Warren Calloway's name. The concessions were distributed across 47 separate written requests, each bearing Warren Calloway's personal signature, submitted to the club's membership director over 6 annual cycles. The concessions covered a range of benefits: annual dues waivers totaling $84,000 over the 6-year period, event access credits amounting to $31,000, complimentary dock access for 9 of Warren's business associates on 42 separate occasions valued at $27,500, and the use of the club's private conference suite on 14 occasions at a published rate of $2,700 per event, which would have amounted to $37,800 if Warren had paid it, which he had not. Every one of the 47 requests had been reviewed and approved by a single staff member in the club's operations office, a former assistant director who had left the club's employment 18 months ago. The discretionary fund's authorization procedures required member signature and operations approval, but did not require secondary review from the CFO or the principal unless a single request exceeded $10,000. No single request had exceeded $10,000. The cumulative total over 6 years had reached $180,000 without triggering a single mandatory review. Warren Calloway had understood this. The second piece was the access logs. Marcus Trent had been running a standard quarterly review of club facility access records when Diane Forsyth called him and asked him to extend the scope of the review to the private conference suite specifically, and to cross-reference the access entries with the members' lounge reservation logs for the same period. The reason for the cross-reference was something Diane had noted while pulling records for the discretionary fund audit. Several of the 14 complimentary conference suite bookings attributed to Warren Calloway's account had been entered not by Warren or his assistant, but by a guest access authorization that ran through Warren's gold membership guest provision, and the name on 47 of those entries, covering a 6-year window, was Preston Hale. Marcus Trent reviewed the full 6 years of Preston Hale access entries in 4 hours on a Wednesday morning. The entries were consistent: 47 visits, all between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, concentrated on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He then pulled the members' lounge reservation logs for the corresponding dates. Serena Marsh had reserved the members' lounge, which sat directly above the conference suite on the club's second floor, on 44 of the 47 dates when Preston Hale's access entry showed him in the conference suite below her. The 3 exceptions were dates when Serena had instead reserved the South Terrace private area, a different space in the same building. Preston Hale was not a member of the Meridian Yacht Club. He had been admitted every single time as a guest of Warren Calloway under the Gold Membership Guest provision, which allowed Gold members to authorize guest access without advance approval from the membership office. Marcus Trent compiled a summary document, 47 access entries, 44 corroborating reservation records, 6 years of dates and times. He sent it to Diane Forsyth on encrypted internal mail at 2:47 in the afternoon. Diane read it in 20 minutes. Then she called Gerald Oakes. The third piece came from the public record. Gerald Oakes, 58 years old, Boston Maritime Trust attorney, a man with 31 years of experience in trust law and a reputation in the New England legal community for being as difficult to move as a granite breakwater in a January storm, had a practice of conducting credential reviews on any person or entity whose name appeared in connection with a trust property he managed before a major event. He ran the review as a matter of course without announcement. The International Yacht Association maintained a public registry of its board members and prestige associates, available online as required by the IYA's Transparency Charter. Warren Calloway appeared on the registry as a prestige board member, and his application, also publicly filed, listed his relevant qualifications. The second qualification listed was co-founder, the Meridian Yacht Club, Newport, Rhode Island, established 1971. Gerald Oakes read this twice. He pulled the club's original articles of incorporation, filed with the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office in March of 1971. The founding member listed was Thomas Edward Marsh, sole incorporator. He pulled the county property records for the original waterfront lot purchase, dated 1969. Thomas Edward Marsh, purchaser. He pulled the original contractor permits for the dock construction and the boathouse conversion. Thomas Edward Marsh, applicant. He found no record of Warren Calloway's name in any document related to the Meridian Yacht Club, dated before 1994, the year Warren had applied for and received gold membership. Warren Calloway had joined a 23-year-old club as a paying member and had subsequently applied to an international body representing himself as one of its founders. He had submitted a written application attesting to this qualification and had obtained a prestige board seat on the basis of that attestation. Every element of the qualification was false, every sentence of it, in the precise legal phrasing that Gerald Oakes used when he subsequently described it to the Trust's independent committee. It was documented fraud submitted to an international maritime organization. Gerald Oakes received the complete 3-part summary on a Thursday afternoon and read it at his desk with his phone off for 45 minutes. He made 7 handwritten notes on a yellow legal pad. He called Elliot at 5 o'clock. They spoke for 22 minutes. When Elliot hung up, he sat at his desk in the home office where he had spent Tuesday mornings managing a club his wife used as a social backdrop. And he thought for a while about his father, and about the pier in the fog in 1984, and about the words Thomas had said, and about what it meant that it had taken 17 years to arrive here, but that the records had been correct the entire time. 3 manila envelopes left Gerald Oakes' office that afternoon. The annual summer gala had been 6 weeks in the making. The Meridian's events director had begun planning in early June. The floral arrangements, the menu developed across 4 working sessions with the executive chef, the wine pairing selected from the cellar's holdings, the lighting designed over 3 walkthroughs with a Newport contractor who understood the particular quality of light that the terrace needed in the evening. The dining room's French doors had been thrown open to extend the space onto the south terrace, where white canvas and wrought iron framing had been erected the previous Thursday. The harbor lay flat and silver below the bluff, and the July evening was warm without being heavy, and the sky over the bay had gone from pink to the deep blue-green that you only see in July on the water when the light holds longer than you expect it to. 80 guests had confirmed. This was the largest gala attendance in 4 years, and it showed in the density of conversation on the terrace, in the way the waitstaff moved with a specific and practiced economy through the crowd. Serena had been dressed since 4 in the afternoon. The white linen dress had been made by a dressmaker in Providence whose work she had been using for 7 years, fitted through the waist, falling just below the knee with a small ruche detail at the shoulder. Her mother's pearl earrings, small warm spheres against her neck, the same ones she wore to every Newport event. Her hair in a loose chignon at the back of her neck, the kind of arrangement that looks effortless and requires 30 minutes. She had checked the mirror 3 times before they left. Elliot wore the navy blazer and the pale blue shirt and said nothing about the mirror or the dress or the pearl earrings. He said nothing in the car. He was thinking about the Eastern Dock House repair, which Sullivan had completed in 9 of the projected 11 days, and about the discretionary fund summary that Diane had sent him that morning with 2 new pieces of information from the outside accounting firm. By 7:30 the terrace was full and the conversation was running at the specific frequency of a crowd that knows each other well enough to be comfortable but not well enough to be honest. Serena moved through it with the fluency of a practiced navigator, her champagne tilted at exactly the right angle, her laughter arriving at exactly the right moments. She introduced Elliot to 3 separate couples in the space of 20 minutes. Each time she offered a description of him. He was good with his hands, she said. He was wonderful with paperwork. He kept things running. She smiled when she said these things, and she touched his arm, and the people she introduced him to smiled back and said something polite and moved on, and Elliot shook each hand firmly and said that it was a pleasure and looked each person briefly in the eye. None of what Serena said was technically false. None of it was anywhere near the truth. At 8:15 Serena moved to the railing at the edge of the main terrace, the harbor lights behind her and the terrace crowd before her, and she did what she had done at every gala for 11 years. She said a few words. She was genuinely good at this. She had a natural sense of pacing and a voice that carried without effort, and she understood how to hold a crowd's attention for 2 minutes without losing a single person in it. "He's not my +1, she said, and the smile arrived before the sentence ended. "He is the +1 of the +1. She gestured toward Elliot with the easy warmth of a woman who is comfortable being watched. The crowd laughed. 80 guests raising their glasses in the building that was 94% of it his. Gloria Calloway, standing at Serena's left with her champagne, said exactly right in the warm and certain voice of someone restating a fact they have known for a long time, and then turned back to the woman she had been speaking with. Warren Calloway raised his glass from the center of the terrace. His gold member badge was visible on the lapel of his cream linen blazer. He had the posture of a man who expects attention when he speaks and has decided to deliver it whether or not the attention has been formally offered. "To the people who hold things up," he said, quietly and visibly, "the caretakers." He looked at Elliot. He smiled with the warm, certain smile of a man who has spent 17 years confident in his reading of another person. The club would not function without people like Elliot. 80 glasses raised. 80 people drinking to the man who owned the room they were standing in. Preston Hale watched from the rail, his sea glass jacket catching the terrace light, his champagne untouched. He had been in the conference suite that morning. It was his 48th visit. Marcus Trent watched from the periphery, the encrypted device in his breast pocket recording. He had been briefed by Gerald Oakes 3 weeks earlier. He understood exactly what he was capturing and precisely why it was going to matter. Reginald Wyatt set his champagne on a tray and looked at Elliot Marsh near the French doors, watching the harbor. He gave a small, almost invisible nod. Then he walked inside. The file on Marcus Trent's encrypted drive was labeled simply June Gala. Gerald Oakes filed the trust disclosure notice with the Meridian Yacht Club's board of directors on a Tuesday morning in early July, 22 days after the summer gala. The document was 11 pages long, with 4 attached exhibits. It was delivered by courier simultaneously to all 7 board members at 9 o'clock. The board consisted of 4 senior members elected annually by the membership body, the club's CFO Diane Forsyth serving in her fiduciary capacity, the club's general counsel retained on an annual basis, and 1 outside independent director appointed by the trust committee. All 7 received the package at the same time. All 7 were required under the Trust's governing documents to complete their individual review within 5 business days and to convene in session within 10 calendar days of receipt. The board convened in 9 days on a Friday afternoon in a conference room at the club, the harbor visible through the windows in the late afternoon light. Gerald Oakes ran the meeting. He was not a man who used 10 words when 3 would do, and he was not a man who allowed imprecision to go unchallenged. He walked the board through the trust disclosure in 40 minutes, laying out the structure of Crestwater Holdings, LLC, the terms of Thomas Marsh's trust instrument, and the basis for the principal's beneficial ownership. He then presented the financial audit findings, $180,000 in discretionary fund concessions over 6 years, 47 requests, Warren Callaway's signature on each one, the authorization chain, and the outside accounting firm's conclusion. He presented Marcus Trent's access log summary, 47 entries for Preston Hale, 44 corroborating reservation records for Serena Marsh, 6 years of Tuesdays and Thursdays. He presented the IYA registry documentation and the trust attorney's formal letter identifying the co-founder designation as a documented fraud under IYA rules and under Rhode Island law. He presented his own recommendation for the formation of an independent committee with full access to all records under a litigation hold. He answered 7 questions from board members. He did not use emotional language. He did not describe Serena Marsh or her family with anything except the precision of documented fact. When a board member asked him whether he thought the trust should exercise its authority to terminate the gold memberships immediately, Gerald Oak said that was a question for the principal, and he looked at Elliot. Elliot had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, following along, adding nothing. He had let Gerald present the information exactly as Gerald had assembled it, without editorial. Now he looked around the table at the 7 people who were looking back at him. "We do this correctly," Elliot said. "Every line documented, no shortcuts. Every person whose membership status is affected has the right to know the committee's finding before that finding is acted on. No one is removed from any list. No records are altered or frozen outside the litigation hold. And the committee's conclusion is the final word, not mine." Dr. Patricia Sundrum, the outside independent director, a former dean of a Rhode Island law school who had served on 12 ethics review boards over 30 years, considered Elliot for a moment. "The trust documents give you the authority to terminate the gold memberships immediately," she said, "by trustee power alone. You understand that?" "I understand that," Elliot said. "And your decision is to decline that authority?" "My decision is to decline that authority until the board has acted through its proper process," Elliot said. "That's how my father built this club. I intend to run it the same way." The independent committee was formed the following morning. Dr. Sundrum chaired it. The other 2 members were the Honorable Horace Finley, a retired Rhode Island Superior Court judge with 38 years on the bench, and Catherine Lim, a Boston-based certified forensic accountant who had testified in 4 federal fraud cases and 2 state securities proceedings. They were given full access to every document under the litigation hold. They were given no deadline. They worked at the pace the material required. The independent committee had been reviewing the files for 11 days when Warren Callaway placed his 4th call to the club's main reception number in the space of 8 days, asking to speak with whoever had authorized the financial audit of the discretionary fund. The emergency board dinner was held on a Saturday evening in late August, 6 weeks after the June gala, in the same dining room, with the same china and the same linen and the same tall white candles, and the harbor dark outside the windows. It was officially described in the invitation as a required member assembly for the purpose of governance disclosure. The gold members were required by the club's bylaws to attend or provide written notice of absence. Of the 41 gold members currently holding active memberships, 39 attended in person, 1 submitted written notice, and 1 sent no notice and did not appear, which was itself a data point that the board noted. The dinner itself was smaller and quieter than the summer gala. 51 attendees in the main dining room, the South Terrace closed. The string quartet was there, playing through the dinner courses which proceeded normally. White wine with the first course. A burgundy with the second. Conversation at all the tables, lower and more careful than usual, because everyone in the room had received the letter and had been trying for 2 weeks to determine what a required member assembly for the purpose of governance disclosure meant for them specifically. Serena and her family arrived at 7:45. Serena wore a dark blue wrap dress. Warren wore his charcoal suit and his gold member pin. Gloria wore her pearls and a gray silk blouse. They took their usual table near the western windows, the table with the view of the harbor entrance, and the main room simultaneously, the table that had been Warren's table for 28 years and that no one had thought to redirect. Preston Hale arrived at 8 o'clock and was admitted under Warren's guest provision for the 49th time. The dinner proceeded. Warren told a story about a competitive sailor he had met at a regatta off Martha's Vineyard 2 years ago. Gloria asked the woman beside her about a renovation project in the woman's Newport house. Serena turned her wine glass by the stem and watched the room. At 9 o'clock, the lights in the dining room dimmed by approximately a third. The string quartet stopped mid-phrase. A man that nearly no one in the room had seen before walked from a side door to a podium at the front of the dining room. He was of medium height, carefully dressed, with the specific composure of a person who has stood at podiums in charge rooms many times and has learned to read the room's tension without taking it in. His name was Charles Whitmore, and he was the board's retained outside attorney. He adjusted the microphone. He placed a single folder on the podium surface. The room was very quiet by the time he opened it. He read from the folder without introduction. Crestwater Holdings, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company duly registered with the Delaware Court of Chancery, holds the beneficial interest in the Meridian Yacht Club and all associated real properties, dock structures, facilities, equipment, and membership administration systems. The beneficial owner of 94% of Crestwater Holdings, LLC, as established by sealed trust instrument, dated and filed effective immediately following the death of Thomas Edward Marsh, founder of the Meridian Yacht Club, is Elliot Thomas Marsh, 94%, effective from the day of his father's passing. Behind the podium, a screen that had been dark and unnoticed since dinner service began now displayed 4 lines of white text on a dark background. Elliot Thomas Marsh, beneficial owner, Crestwater Holdings, LLC, 94%. The room did not make a sound. Warren Calloway set down his wineglass. He set it down slowly with a precision that suggested that setting it down correctly was the only thing he was certain of at this particular moment. Serena looked at the screen. Her face did not move. She was looking at her husband's name in white letters on a screen in the club she had been attending for 11 years, as if it were her family's birthright, and the screen said something that her mind was processing at the speed of a person who has just discovered that a building she thought she understood has a foundation she never knew existed. Preston Hale looked at Serena. She did not look back. Dr. Patricia Sundram approached the podium when Charles Whitmore stepped aside. She read the independent committee's findings in 2 precise paragraphs. The International Yacht Association application submitted by Warren Calloway listed a co-founder qualification that was unsupported by any document, deed, permit, corporate filing, or public record in the entire history of the Meridian Yacht Club. The committee had reviewed the club's complete corporate history, all public filings, all property records, and the IYA's own application standards. The designation was fraudulent within the meaning of the IYA's Membership Conduct Code and within the applicable standards of Rhode Island law. The committee recommended unanimously the immediate revocation of the gold membership held by Warren Calloway in accordance with Section 7.4 of the club's bylaws governing member conduct. A young woman walked from the side of the room to Warren Calloway's table. She was precise and unhurried. She extended her right hand, palm up, across the table in front of Warren. Warren looked at her hand. He looked at the screen behind the podium, where Elliot's name remained in white letters. He looked at the hand again. He reached into the breast pocket of his charcoal suit and withdrew the gold membership card he had held for 28 years and placed it in the young woman's palm. She thanked him. She left the table. She did not rush. A second staff member crossed the room to where Preston Hale was sitting. Preston Hale stood before the staff member reached him, as if standing were a way to choose what was happening next. The staff member asked him quietly to surrender his guest access badge. Preston looked across the room at Serena. Serena was still looking at the screen. He removed the badge from his jacket pocket and placed it in the staff member's hand and did not speak. Elliot Marsh was standing near the back of the dining room, beside the interior door, in the navy blazer he wore to events. He had not gone to the podium. He had not spoken. He had listened to Charles Whitmore read 3 sentences and watched his name appear on a screen. And he had thought about his father, on a piling at the end of a pier in the fog in 1984, and about the light coming through the grey water, and about the sounds the harbor makes when you cannot see it. He did not smile. He did not look across the room at Serena. He did not watch Warren's face when the card was taken. He stood near the back and looked at the screen for a moment, and then he looked at the harbor through the dining room window, where the August night lay flat and dark on the water. Somewhere in the room, 3 board members who had been on the June gala terrace and had raised their glasses to the caretaker now understood what Reginald Wyatt's quiet nod had meant 8 weeks ago, when he had set down his champagne and gone inside without finishing it. Serena found Elliot in the corridor, outside the dining room 17 minutes after Charles Whitmore left the podium. The corridor was a long white hall between the dining room and the private events wing, marble floor, a row of framed photographs of the club's history along one wall, the oldest photographs black and white and dating to the 1970s. Serena's heels on the marble produced a sound that carried clearly. She walked quickly. She had her champagne glass in her hand still, though it had been empty for 20 minutes. Elliot was standing at a window at the halfway point of the corridor, looking at the harbor. He turned when he heard her. "Your father built this," Serena said. Her voice was controlled. It was the voice of a person exercising significant effort to remain controlled, which is a different thing from being composed. "This is Thomas's club, you know that. You grew up here." "My father built this," Elliot said. "He left it to me in a sealed trust. That trust has been in existence for 17 years. For 16 of those years during which you have been my wife, you called me invisible in this room, in front of 80 members, in your husband's club. I did not say invisible. You introduced me as the caretaker to the room I own." Serena shifted. She looked at the wall of photographs for a moment, the old black and white pictures of Thomas Marsh and the dock construction and the first members' dinner in 1971. "You should have told me," she said. 16 years. You should have said something." "You gave me no reason to trust you," Elliot said. He said it without heat or bitterness, in the tone of someone stating a fact that has been true for a long time and has stopped producing pain, the way a scar stops hurting while remaining entirely present. "The money." Serena's voice changed register slightly, moved towards something more urgent. "The fund. I didn't know about the money. That was my father. I didn't know." Elliot reached into his inside jacket pocket and removed a folded document, 3 pages creased once. He held it out. "Your father's signature is on 47 concession requests," he said. "Your name is on the joint account to which 14 of the discretionary fund credits were redirected. The committee found both. It's all in here." Serena looked at the document. She did not take it. "We can fix this," she said. The sentence was smaller than the ones before it, less certain of itself. "Elliot, we can figure this out." "The committee fixed it," Elliot said. "Correctly. Through proper process? Without me asking for anything outside that process? Without me using the authority I had to act unilaterally? The board followed its procedures exactly as they were designed to be followed. I am satisfied with the outcome." "Preston wasn't," Serena started. "I haven't mentioned Preston," Elliot said. The corridor was very quiet. The sound of the string quartet through the dining room walls. Faint now, some other Vivaldi passage. Elliot reached into his other jacket pocket and held something out in his open palm. It was a small pendant on a thin silver chain, a compass rose cast in aged silver with a sapphire chip the size of a small nail head at its center. The silver had the quality of something handled daily for a long time, smooth and warm. It was not an expensive piece, it was old. Thomas Marsh had carried it in his left trouser pocket every working day of his life since Elliot was 6 years old, and Elliot had carried it in the same pocket every working day of his own life since the November Thomas died. Serena looked at it. She had been married to Elliot for 16 years. She had packed his luggage for trips and organized his closet and handed him his keys and jacket on 100 mornings, and she had never once asked what the silver thing was. "Your mother said something at the June gala," Elliot said. He closed his hand over the compass rose and returned it to his pocket. "She said, to the people who hold things up, quietly, invisibly, she said it the way she meant it, as a category of person, as if being invisible were a quality that certain people simply have." He paused for a moment. "My father said something when I was 12. He took me to the end of the pier in the morning fog, and he said still waters carry the deepest currents. Never let the foolish mistake your calm for emptiness. I have been thinking about that for 34 years. He looked at Serena for a moment, directly, without anger, without softness. I think I finally understood what he meant. He turned and walked back through the corridor door into the dining room. The consequences arrived in the weeks that followed with the quiet inevitability of things that have been set in motion correctly and are simply proceeding to their conclusions. Warren Calloway's consortium, Calloway Brent Realty Partners, operated from the fourth floor of a Federal Street building in downtown Boston, and it had been his professional home for 38 years. The firm had 4 senior partners. Within 5 weeks of the IYA Ethics Board's public notice, 3 of them submitted written withdrawal letters. The IYA had referred the fraudulent application to its membership ethics body as required by its charter, and the ethics body had issued a public finding available in the IYA's online directory. The first partner's letter cited the notice directly and named the specific IYA bylaw the fraud had violated. The second cited the notice and added that the firm had not been consulted before the application was submitted. The third cited a subsequent review of the firm's own application records that had revealed irregularities in other self-represented qualifications. Warren Calloway's name was removed from the IYA Prestige Board directory within 10 days of the finding. The directory page where his name had appeared was updated with no annotation. Gloria Calloway stopped attending Newport's August social events. 3 women called her in the week after the board dinner. Women she had known for more than 20 years. Women who had stood on the June Gala terrace and laughed at the toast to the caretakers, who were now reconstructing the memory of that evening through the lens of what they now knew and arriving at conclusions about their own behavior that were not comfortable. Gloria did not return their calls. She spent August at the Newport house. She did not go to the Harbor Club's closing dinner in September. She did not attend the charity lunch in mid-August that she had chaired for 6 years. She told no one why. Preston Hale, who had been a maritime property broker at a Boston firm for 9 years, had developed over 6 years a very clear understanding of which situations to exit cleanly and quickly when they changed direction. He began transferring his brokerage registration to a different state within the week after the board dinner. He wrote Serena a letter. 1 paragraph addressed to her at the Calloway Newport house because he had already returned his key to the Providence house before he wrote it. The letter said that the circumstances had become difficult for everyone and that he thought it best to create distance and that he wished her well. He included a new phone number. He had already changed the previous one. Serena's family law attorney in Providence reviewed the Delaware Trust Instrument, the Crestwater Holdings, LLC operating agreement, the original trust deed filed with the Delaware Court of Chancery, and the club's Rhode Island Articles of Incorporation over 3 days. She called Serena at the end of those 3 days and told her, as precisely as she could, the legal reality. The trust had been established in the final year of Thomas Marsh's life, before Serena and Elliot were married. The death-triggered transfer of beneficial ownership had occurred 17 years ago, 1 year before the marriage. Serena had no claim on the club's assets, no claim on the trust's holdings, and no viable challenge to the committee's findings, which had been issued through a process that was both procedurally correct and documentarily complete. There was, the attorney said, nothing to contest. Serena made one more call that evening. She dialed 4 times. The line rang 4 times each time and went to an automated message saying the caller had reached a number that was no longer in service. The last call Serena made that night went unanswered. The number had been disconnected. The morning after the board dinner was a Monday. The harbor was calm and the fog had come in overnight from the bay and was sitting thick on the water at 6:45 when Elliot arrived at the Meridian, the kind of dense August fog that Newport sometimes wakes to, the kind that makes the harbor sound closer than it is, and the dock lights glow in their halos. He had called ahead. When he came through the club's staff entrance, Diane Forsyth was already at the kitchen counter with coffee, and the events director was pulling chairs from the stacked rows at the back of the main dining room, and the executive chef was measuring grounds at the commercial urn. Elliot asked Diane to prepare the main room and the south terrace with enough seating for the full staff. He asked the events director to help him send notifications to every department head to call their full teams in for a meeting at 7:30. Which was before the club's normal opening time. He asked the chef to make enough coffee for 140 people. By 7:30, all 140 full-time employees of the Meridian Yacht Club were in the main dining room and on the south terrace, the canvas structure now removed from the gala and the terrace open to the August morning fog. Dock staff and kitchen staff and housekeeping and maintenance and membership services and the events team and the wait staff and the bartenders and the groundskeepers and the dock hands, all of them. Elliot stood at the front of the room in a grey linen jacket, unshaved, and he looked at them. He said nothing for a moment. Then he talked for 10 minutes. He told them that the trust ownership had been publicly disclosed the previous evening and that most of them had probably heard something about it already. He told them that the club's ownership structure was now a matter of public record and that there was nothing in that record they needed to be concerned about. He told them that the club's financial position was sound, the operating accounts were in excellent order, the debt service on the property was current, the reserve fund was at its target level, and the annual audit had found no irregularities anywhere in the club's operating budget. He thanked Diane Forsyth for the quality of her work over 6 years and for the specific vigilance that had produced this year's audit scope. He thanked Marcus Trent by name. He thanked the executive chef. He thanked the events director, the membership director, David Ortega, who ran the dock operations, the housekeeping supervisor, the maintenance chief, and 4 specific members of the waitstaff who had handled the previous evening's event with the same professionalism they handled every event. He said each name individually. He looked at the person when he said it. He told them that every full-time position was guaranteed, every salary, every benefit. Every pension contribution that the trust had been making since each employee's hire date would continue uninterrupted. There would be no restructuring, no reductions, no changes to the club's service standards, no rebranding, no name change. The Meridian Yacht Club was what it had been when Thomas Marsh opened it in July of 1971 with 12 members and a kitchen and a single dock. It would remain what it was. Afterward, he walked out to the original pier. It was the pier that Thomas had built, the first structure he had put into the Newport waterfront. The wood in the deck had been replaced twice and in the supporting structure once, but the original pilings at the eastern end were still Thomas's, treated and reinforced in sections over the years, but the same wood, the same placement, the same depth in the harbor mud. Elliot walked to the end of the pier in the morning fog. The harbor was close and audible, the water moving against the dock supports with the sound it always makes, the sound of something patient and enormous that will be there long after all the human concerns on its surface have concluded. He took the compass rose pendant from his pocket and held it in his right hand. The silver was warm from his body. The sapphire chip at the center caught no light in the fog. He stood there for a while. He thought of his father sitting on a piling at the end of this same pier in the summer of 1984, the water pewter-colored and still. He thought of the way Thomas had sat there without hurrying, without needing the silence to end. He thought of what Thomas had said, "Still waters carry the deepest currents. Never let the foolish mistake your calm for emptiness." He had been 12 when he heard those words. He had thought he understood them then. He understood them differently now, standing at the end of his father's pier, with his father's compass rose in his hand on a foggy August morning, the harbor doing what harbors do, which is to say, continuing in both directions in all weathers, regardless. He had made no public statement, he had given no interview, he had not approached a single person in the dining room the previous evening to explain or to gloat or to offer his perspective. His name had appeared on a screen, and the documents had spoken, and the committee had done its work, and the board had followed its process. And that was all. His name would not appear on any public plaque. The club's entryway signage would not be changed. The staff who greeted members at the door would wear the same uniforms and use the same language and maintain the same standard. The dining room, where 80 guests had raised their glasses to the caretaker, would set its tables as it always had. And the dock staff would run their operations as they always had, and none of it would carry any sign of what had happened or who had been standing at the back of the room while it happened. The fog was beginning to lift at the edges, the way it does before it burns off entirely, the water becoming visible in sections as the morning light found its angles. There are men who build their lives on the surface, where everything is visible and the light catches the shine, and the assembled crowd can see and approve and raise a glass. And there are men who build deeper than that, down in the places where the foundation lives, in the materials and the structures that hold the visible surface up. You never see that work. You do not know it is there until something tries to shake the building and the building does not move. The true measure of a man is not what he claims in a crowded room when the champagne is cold and the lights are warm and the crowd is arranged to receive him. The true measure is what remains standing in that room after every claim has been tested and every signature has been verified and every access log has been read from the beginning to the end. Elliot Marsh stood at the end of his father's pier with the compass rose in his palm, and the fog lifted slowly over Narragansett Bay, and the harbor that Thomas Marsh had built something permanent on the edge of continued doing what it had always done, patient and enormous and indifferent to the particular concerns of the particular season, carrying everything on its surface forward into whatever came next, holding its deepest currents where only the still water runs.